much for being here tonight. My name is Candida Mamet. I'm editor and publisher of Healthy Living, and we're so excited to have teamed up with Dr. Mark McCullough. We've been doing that for some time now, and it's a great honor to have him here. If I could just take care of some housekeeping, if folks could shut up their cell phones and any kind of electronic devices, that would be great. The ladies in the back will be handing out some prizes with some raffles, so during the break, if you'd like, you can feel free to fill out a raffle. Well, I'd like to introduce to you Amalia Beretta, who will share with you a nice story that she has about knowing Dr. Mark McCullough. Most of you may know Amalia as member of the Boston's WCBB TV News Center 5. She's on the news team there. And prior to Channel 5, Beretta worked as a weekend news anchor and reporter for WHDH TV in Boston. And while she was there, she was awarded 3 Emmys for her reports on the Mexico City earthquake in 1986 and for a series and documentary on Poor Cristo, which was a Boston-based organization of doctors and nurses who assisted the medically disadvantaged in Ecuador. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Amalia Beretta, and now a warm welcome.
Good evening, and it's Amalia. I'm so happy to be here tonight. I'm honored to be here, in fact. I thank Mark for the invitation. We contacted each other by email about this, and I told him I really feel like I would do anything within my power to him because he has done so much for me and for my health. I have migraine headaches, and I am very lucky to know Charlie Kravitz, who heads up New England Cable News, which is where Mark has a regular segment. And Charlie knows that I have migraine headaches, and so he talked to me about Mark, this is a term of endearment. Mark, I hope you're not offended by this, but when I first started seeing him, I used to call him my hocus pocus guy. And I did that because I was so rooted in Western medicine and the idea of Western medicine. And to her credit, my headache doctor, the Western medicine doctor, is the one who suggested that maybe I should see someone who could advise me about alternative ways to address my headaches. I have had them all of my life. My earliest memories about him is being sent home from second grade with migraines. You name it, I've taken it. Okay? I've been treated by my Western medicine doctor, who was originally at the Faulkner, where they had a headache clinic, for about 17 or 18 years now. And in those 17 or 18 years, I've taken a lot of medication. A lot of it. They all have side effects. They all work for a while, and then they stop working. And when they stop working, the headache comes back even more strongly. So my doctor was really kind of at her wit's end about it with me because I was having a very bad year. She had put me on something else. It was kind of working, but not really. And so that's when she said, maybe you should consider seeing somebody, homeopathic, alternative, somebody different. And so I talked to Charlie about it. Charlie told me about Mark, that Mark had helped another friend of his with migraines, and it was amazing. And so I went to Mark. And my first reaction, which I didn't share with him at the time, when I saw him was, wow, this guy looks really healthy. I mean, amazingly healthy. And I sat in his office and he talked to me about my headaches, their patterns, how long I'd had them, history, whatnot. And he consulted this little black book, and I don't know what, to this day, I don't know what that is, but it's almost like a magic book as far as I'm concerned. And he made all kinds of suggestions about how I should alter my diet. And that's basically what I've done, is dramatically alter my diet. And he also told me to take some supplements, very exotic things like wild yam and methionine and sanguinaria. I love talking about this stuff because people just, what is that? Which is kind of what I was thinking when he was talking about it. But there was just no alternative. My mindset was, I'm here to see what he can do for me, and I've got to go into it 100%. As he used to email me, stay the road, try this and stay the road, because I'd email him and I'd say, Mark, I'm having headaches in the afternoon, little headaches about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he'd write back the reason, and which I could never, really fully comprehend his terms and whatnot, but then he'd say, try taking wild yam 3 times a day. And it was like flipping a switch. I mean, it was the most amazing thing. The foods that he asked me to stop eating were foods that eventually, as your body processes them, as I understood it, caused inflammation. And, of course, inflammation of your blood vessels is one of the reasons for headaches. So it's just been an unbelievable improvement in my health overall, never mind just the headaches. The headaches I'm getting now are tiny. I mean, they're so small and so rare. I'm so grateful for what he's done for me. I just can't say enough about him. And so I hope you listen to my Hocus Pocus guy, and that he can open up your minds to alternative ways of treating your body. And I know if you have something that ails you or that bothers you, you can help them too. So, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Amalia.
Thank you.
And by the way, that black book was nothing but an address book. I got your address for that, actually, so that I could contact you and do this. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I just need this one. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you, vendors. Thank you, Candida. And I appreciate so many of you, of course, on a regular basis. And those of you that I don't know, I appreciate you for being here for the first time. The great Taoist philosopher Lao Tzu once said, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. My adaptation reads something like this. Give a man a pill and he'll need 2 more to offset the side effects from the first one. Teach him that he is the prescription, and let his wholeness produce his wellness. Tonight, as always, my intention is to teach you that you are the prescription. And Mike, if we could just kind of fire up the first slide. The first slide is one that reads that you are a reality machine. The quote that I wrote is, "Our thoughts are the living cells of our dreams. Our dreams are the outstretched fingers of our souls, reaching far beyond our mortal grasp, ever intent on redesigning a most divine destiny." Your destiny is your choice. Most people aren't used to thinking thoughts like that. Let's go to the next slide. This is the qualifier. We start from the scientific and material perspective. You are a reality machine. You're made of 100 trillion cells, 100,000 chemical reactions per second each. 100 billion nerve cells or neurons in the brain. Each neuron is constantly linking up with 50,000 other neurons, and that creates the network of neurons in your brain that generates your reality physically as well as mentally. Neural networks are programmed from thoughts. Availability of 3.4 million new creative thoughts per day. Everybody. Average person, 55,000 thoughts per day that are repetitious. You're getting cheated. The brain can process 400 billion bits of information per second. That's an average of 2,000 bits of information. We average, 2,000 bits of information per second. So what our capability is and what we're producing is a remarkably disparaging figure. So once again, there are sections in the brain that determine what quality of life you have, your belief system, your thoughts, and the most recent research in neuroscience, neuroplasticity, tells us that you and I are creating sickness, you and I are creating problems far beyond our wildest imagination with our minds, our thoughts, and we're creating reality with our minds and our thoughts that have everything to do with how well we are or aren't, or how well we are determined to become. Next slide. Every man can, if he so desires, become the sculptor of his own brain. That's a remarkable quote from neuroscientist Santiago Ramon y Cajal. That really sets the tone for what I'd like to talk about tonight. Every man, if he so desires, becomes a sculptor of his own brain. The question is, do you desire? Of course, the question along with that is are you really aware of what your potential is? Most people, of course, are not. Next slide. Placebo, your brain is designed to program your reality based on whatever you're willing to believe. Italian researcher Antonio Benedetti recently gave Parkinson's patients a placebo, measured the electrical activity of individual nerve cells. The cells decreased in firing about 40%, reducing muscle rigidity and motion restriction. They thought they were getting a medicine. They weren't getting a medicine. They were getting a placebo. They're getting water. These are Parkinson's patients. These weren't people who had imagination problems, at least that they knew of. But the point is they were measuring a 40% reduction in muscle rigidity and motion restriction immediately after being given the water. Researchers of neuroscience have recently discovered that in your brain you actually have very powerful hormones that are capable of actually acting like morphine. Morphine actually means brain hormone, brain morphine. And the morphine in the brain that you produce hormonally is 25,000 times stronger than anything that pharmaceutical medicine produces. 25,000 times stronger. So at what's called levels of eager expectation, that's what the scientists in neuroscience research refer to it. When the brain goes into a response of excitability over anticipation, if you're experiencing enough pain and discomfort, if you're desperate enough, you are waiting for relief. So there's a high level of biochemical shifting that takes place with expectancy. Expectancy alone produces muscle restriction response. Just the expectation alone. Once they were given the placebo or water, they had almost half reduction in response. One of the things I wanted to point out too, in terms of reality, this is a reality. This is the way the brain works. The question is, how is the brain being fed? What kind of information, what kind of hope or hopelessness is the brain being fed? How is your brain being set up for your reality? Let's go to the next slide. University of Michigan researchers recently injected the jaws of healthy young men with salt water in order to induce painful pressure while measuring their brains with PET scans. The men were then given a placebo that they were told was a pain reliever. Their brains then immediately began to release more endorphins, significantly blocking their pain. In order to return to placebo pain levels, the researchers had to dramatically increase the dose of saltwater solution. It literally changed the neurological pain effect at a cellular level. Okay? And that's, again, expectancy. When the brain goes into a level of expectancy, or what's called eagerness, it literally changes the hormonal response. So when you say something good or positive or hopeful, you immediately start getting an expectancy response hormonally in the brain, whether you get the medication or not. Now, most of us are programmed to believe that it's the medication that does the healing. But I wonder how many times your hormones in your brain actually do the actual healing. Next slide. Dr. Carl and Stephanie Simonton study, 1978. 159 incurable cancer patients were told that they had no more than 12 months to live. They were stage 4. They were considered hopeless. After 2 years, they reported a 30% recovery or recovering response from one therapy alone. One single therapy. No medication, no pills, nothing material. The singular therapy that these 159 patients experienced was positive visualization. In their mind, they spent 45 minutes every single day visualizing that they were defeating their cancer. Pure expectancy, pure programming, pure positive reflex. And they had a 30% recovered, clean recovered, or recovering response. And that was after 2 years. Dr. Peng, the world's first medicine-less hospital in China, was established in Guangxi province. 4,000 to 7,000 residents at any given time with inoperable diseases. Science went in and basically evaluated what their response rate was. 15% cured, 38% no symptoms, 42% marked improvement. They did one thing and one thing only, Qigong. They simply had Qigong masters placing their hands over their head and programming a shift in their energy, a shift in their Qi. Next. Heaven and hell, your left and right prefrontal cortex. Who is it that heals when these experiences happen? Who is it that doesn't heal? Who is it that gets sick? Why do they get sick? Who is it that doesn't get sick? Why is it that some people who are spouses get AIDS and they have relations with their spouse and the other mate doesn't contract the AIDS? Why is that? Why does Magic Johnson have AIDS and his wife Cookie still doesn't test positive, 15 to 20 years later? There are many differences, there are many reasons, but one of the things we're going to talk about this evening that neuroplasticity has made us increasingly more aware of is that heaven and hell live right in your brain. Your left and right prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex evolved some 250,000 years ago, providing the first human sophisticated thought. Prior to that, the only thought that we would have had was survival. Clubbing something that we needed to eat. Building a fire to stay warm. Survival. The prefrontal cortex changed all that. Now the emotional mind and the spiritual mind came together. The two cortexes really have been studied extensively in recent years. And researchers have established very clearly now that you and I produce all of our heaven and all of our hell through these two brain centers. Let's go to the next slide. The prefrontal cortex on the right side, infinite possibility, eagerness, positivity, confidence. The left, limitation, helplessness, negativity, discouragement. Okay? We talked earlier about how 55,000 thoughts a day in some people's brains produce an 80% repetition response. The same old negative stuff. Remembering all the painful events that ever happened in your life. Recycling subconsciously, unconsciously, all day long, every day. In some cases for an entire lifetime. Okay, but you don't have to stay there because what neuroplasticity now tells us, neuroscience now tells us, that you can live in whichever center you prefer. The greatest power you have is the power of choice. Hell is not outside. There's nobody to blame. You can escape it by reprogramming where your brain projects itself. Next. Until recently, it was believed that the limbic system was the primary emotional center of the brain. Noted neuroscience researchers such as Dr. Wayne Drevitz at the University of Pittsburgh, University of Wisconsin's Dr. Richard Davidson have recently discovered that the right prefrontal cortex signals the amygdala. Here they tell us all bad memories are constantly recalled and anxiety and depression are rooted. The right prefrontal cortex has been dubbed the helpless brain. They also tell us that the left prefrontal cortex signals the basal ganglia and the ventral tegmental. The left prefrontal cortex is the brain of eagerness. Here's where the happiness brain contemplates infinite possibility. This is the place where we can access the power to transcend the emotional mind. This is the brain that heals. This is the 30 to 40 percentile that in study after study has recoveries from things that material science says they have no business recovering from. We can't explain it. It was random. No. The right prefrontal cortex has been dubbed the helpless brain. The slide before may, I don't, let's go back to the slide before. Let's look at it. Yeah, that's switching. Yeah. Yeah, it's the left that actually is infinite possibility, eagerness possibility. It doesn't. No, it doesn't have anything to do with it whatsoever. Let's go to the next slide again, Mike. Let's repeat that. And so, for years, what they believed is they believed that the amygdala worked pretty much by itself within the limbic system, recording and holding on to and projecting and recycling negative emotion. We now know that that's not true. We now know that the prefrontal cortexes are actually the centers where these experiences take place. And we also know that programming is ever changeable in both these areas. These areas are highly receptive to programming. Let's go to the next slide. Dr. Richard Brown in Columbia recently discovered a 5-fold increase in vasopressin, which is blood pressure increaser, and right prefrontal dominance, and dramatic uptake in oxytocin or feel-good hormone receptors with left prefrontal cortex dominance. So there's entirely different chemistries in both of these centers. Entirely different hormonal systems, entirely different, I guess I'd say, program systems. But the most important thing to realize here is not only do these centers send messages and program and set us up for responsiveness as to whether we heal or whether we don't heal, whether we get sick or whether we don't get sick, whether probability for illness or recovery is greater or lesser, really largely in these centers, but these centers are also receptors themselves. Let's go to the next slide. University of Washington researchers recently performed autopsies on bipolar brains and discovered as much as a 40% shrinkage in the left prefrontal cortex. They believe that brain shrinkage was causally influenced by repetitious negative thought-based neuronet programming. This behavior to brain cause and effect represents a recent revolutionary shift in science posed by neuroplasticity. So again, what we're saying is, not only do you have the right center that sets you up for repetitious negativity and increasing probability for disease, you have a left center that does just the opposite, increases eagerness, prospects for limitless potential, growth, and healing. But these centers not only transmit, as I said, the receptors as well, so they receive information constantly. So the manner in which they're programmed has everything to do with the response that they perform, which is a frightening prospect. I just made a couple of quick notes. According to CNN expose, the Parents Television Council reported that American children under the age of 12 were witnessing an average of 8 violent acts per viewing hour. Adults reportedly 6.3 violent acts per viewing hour. So kids are getting more than we are. When you consider that we spend 4.2 hours watching television per day, this suggests that the average American adult and child use some 11,000 violent acts every year on television alone. That's our entertainment source. Jennifer Aubrey of the University of Missouri analyzed 84 hours of primetime television broadcasting between the hours of 8 and 11 p.m. on all the major television networks. She found that during these 84 hours, there were 676 scenes containing sexual references, 96% of which contained only negative sexual references. The end product of right prefrontal inculcation, according to a recent National Consumers League survey of 1,074 adults, 80% said that severe stress was an ongoing problem. 74% said that they get too little sleep. 41% described themselves as being burned out and overworked. According to the National Institute of Health, depression strikes 17 million Americans annually, and 2.4 million Americans are diagnosed with generalized anxiety annually. Let's go to the next slide. Neuroplasticity. We know that any repeated action causes the brain to rewire. That's all very well established science. Now what we've done is simply show how focus of attention can get the brain circuits to fire and then wire together. That's the basic building mechanism whereby you reconstruct your brain. That's Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, who's a leading neuroplasticity researcher from UCLA. What he's really saying there is what we hit ourselves with, what we surround ourselves with, something that the ancient Chinese knew about all the time. I know in a lot of my ancient Chinese studies, my Taoist studies, with Master Ni and a lot of the work that I've done, a lot of the reading that I've done, they used to constantly tell us that in ancient China they always said, well, we don't just eat with our mouths, we eat with our eyes and ears as well. We eat with our minds. Something that we might consider in this country because we have an awful lot of exposure to, as we just found out, a lot of negative imagery. And the negative imagery has a great deal to do with the systemic response to disease. Disease is a very, very high-tech system. Disease isn't just something that strikes a few people. It's assaulting you 24 hours a day. And it's trying to find its way insidiously into your cells through your psyche. The question is, how are you defending and protecting your sensory responsiveness? Let's go to the next slide. Neuroplasticity is a study of the brain's ability to grow new neurons and rewire itself through a process of thought reformatting. One of the first pioneering experiments actually took place at Bellevue Hospital in New York during the late 1970s. 75% of paralysis subjects believed beyond recovery. That was defined as paralyzed for more than 20 years. Showed a 100% total recovery with a combination of physical therapy and positive brain reformatting exercises. The reason given for the success is repeated positive thought that generates brain reformatting. First of all, they believed that they could recover after years being told that they couldn't, because they were given a sentence which says, no, if you've been paralyzed for more than 20 years, we're just going to stuff you over in the corner and forget about you. And somebody came along and said, guess what? We're not going to forget about you anymore. We've got new science, new hope, new possibilities. Let's see if we can't work with what you got. And just the pure upliftment and expectation, as we said earlier, is enough to change circuiting in the brain. Let's go on. In a recent neuroplasticity experiment, two groups of non-pianists were asked to learn a series of one-handed piano exercises. They were instructed to rehearse for 2 hours a day for 14 days. Only one group was asked to actually play the piano. The other group was asked to only imagine the exercises in their mind. After 5 days of brain scans, it was revealed that both groups grew exactly the same number of brain circuits. Exactly the same number of brain circuits. It didn't matter who was playing and who was imagining. Your brain does not know the difference between what you see with your eyes and what you see in your mind. It does not know the difference. I've said many times when I've given talks, when you dream and you fall off a cliff, that's real perspiration when you wake yourself up. That's a real elevated heart response. That's real nervousness. That's real adrenaline that doesn't let you get right back to sleep. That's chemistry that's been influenced by something that you imagined. And once again, your mind is real good at imagining and taking what it imagines and converting it into reality. So when you're surrounding yourself with 11,000 violent acts a year in your mode of entertainment, it's pretty easy to see why we all have such a hard time helping people recover. Let's go on. Dr. Richard Davis at the University of Wisconsin recently wired Tibetan monks with electrodes during compassion meditation, discovered that they were able to activate 99.9% of their brain. By the way, they guesstimate that the average person uses between 8 and 11.5. And by the way, they weren't crunching computer work or anything like that. Moreover, he found that their ability to produce gamma waves, really deep relaxation responses, otherworldly vibration, otherworldly energy, otherworldly electricity coming from the mind, more mind than brain, something beyond typical human waves. Their dedicated positive repetition and meditation, when combined with their power of compassion and intention, put them in a state defined as total freedom from suffering. They wired them every which way but loose. They had over 259 electrodes in one month. And they couldn't believe what they were finding. They said, we've never seen anything like this. And the monks just said, well, keep going, keep us wired up. Keep us wired up. And the Dalai Lama was thrilled to take part in all this work, by the way. The Dalai Lama had a great deal to do with all of this research, and is still very much at the front of this research. And they can't figure out for the life of them. I love to tell this great story about Ji Chumo Yoga. When I wrote my first book, The Wu Wei, I came across some Herbert Benson research. And Herb Benson, of course, was working at the Deacons for years and did a lot of the mind-body research up at Harvard. Well, there's one story that really stuck with me. I had to write about it in a way, and it's one of my favorite stories. But Dr. Benson heard this remarkable story about Tibetan monks who performed this tradition called Ji Tumo Yoga. And all it was this legendary story about these monks that lived 3,000 feet up in the mountains. And they had these very heavy flannel robes to protect them from the chill. And what they did, according to this legend, was they washed the robes ceremonially every week by hand in this cold, cold water. And then they put the robes on because they didn't have any form of clothes dryers up there at 3,000 feet up. So they put the robes on soaking wet, and they knelt down and went into their meditation, and they dried the robes by meditating. So Benson said, I got to see this. So he got the money together from Harvard to actually take a film crew and a science crew up to the top of the mountains. So the story that he tells is remarkable. They get up there and they get the camera set up, and everything's in place. Finally, here they go. The monks are doing the meditation response. And within a matter of 3 to 5 minutes, the camera lenses all start to fog up. So Benson's going around wiping off all the camera lenses, and he said, quick, somebody get a temperature of these monks. Let's find out if these monks have a really elevated temperature. So they checked the temperature of the monks, and they said, 98.6. Well, then where the heck is the steam coming from? It's freezing up here. I don't know, just keep going. Wiping off the lenses, steam in the room, freezing cold. How do you get steam in a freezing cold room? So invariably what they did is they continued this experiment, and about 15 to 20 minutes went on, and these heavy, soaking wet, freezing cold flannel robes were completely dried in about 15 to 20 minutes. They couldn't figure out to this day why those robes are like that. But the point that the monks are trying to get us to tap into is there is so much more in you than you are programmed to believe, and in most cases, than you're comfortable enough to be willing to believe. Next. Mike, can you do the next one? Non-local mind. Non-local mind is the pure soul or spirit known as universal consciousness operating outside the boundaries of normal space and time. It is the great organizing and unifying force of the universe, infinite in scope and duration. By its nature, non-local mind connects all things because it is all things. And once again, we're talking about a higher level of mind that you have access to. We're going to show you what neuroscience says about you gaining access to it and give you some exercises to work with. It's not very complicated either. But when you think about what we said a moment ago about the monks, repetition and positivity, how many people exercise repeated positivity in mind? I mean, we just don't do that. You know, we don't do that. We're surrounded by negativity, stress, trauma, and we really rarely take the opportunity to exercise the part of our mind and the experience of mind that actually produces those results. Yet everybody wants to be healed. Everybody wants infinite possibility. Everybody loves the concept of the law of attraction. Everybody is attracted to the law of attraction. Everybody is excited and energized by the notion of maximizing their potential, health, healing, intelligence, wisdom, peace, freedom from all kinds of negative possibilities. But again, the question that I always put to this whole issue is, like we talk about with dysfunctionalism, we're always told that dysfunctionalism is all about two extremes, all or nothing behavior. That's always dysfunctional. Those are extremes. That is disease. That is disease. So we've got monks that are actually meditating for 55 years, 60 years, for endless hours of meditation, and working their way to this state where they're using 99.9% of the brain. We're going to say to ourselves, great, that ain't me. So we cut out completely. Okay? So because we can't do 55,000 hours of meditation, we say, that's not for us. We're out of here. Forget it. That's them. Give me a pill. Okay? But what the message with this neuroplasticity research is all about is, guess what? There's a place in the middle. There's a place in the middle. You don't have to do 55,000 hours over here, but you certainly have to do more than nothing. You certainly have to get more motivated than to just cut out completely and to just leave it to the pros. Remember what we said earlier. You are the prescription. You just don't know that yet. Let's go on to the next slide. Chief Coordinator of Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research, or PAIR Lab, Roger Nelson, has long held the theory that there is a living collective consciousness, non-local consciousness, emanating from our world. In 1977, he decided to place field REGs, or highly sensitive electromagnetic field measuring devices, in 50 different places all around the world. These REGs recorded and transmitted a continuous stream of random data into one central location hub by way of the internet. Let's go on to the next slide. Nelson and his colleagues would periodically study the data, comparing it with the world's biggest breaking news stories. By 2006, they studied over 200 of the world's biggest stories, including the death of JFK Jr., global millennium celebrations, and of course 9/11. Nelson and his colleagues analyzed 4 years of information, saw a clear parallel between global reaction, whether horror or jubilation, in the REG machines. Moreover, they saw a distinct pattern emerge. Next slide. The greater the degree of horror, the greater the electromagnetic order was outputted by the machines. Law of compensation. Law of compensation. The reaction captured 37 of the global machines at 9/11, 2 hours before the first tower was hit, was unprecedented. The greatest variance away from any randomness took place at this time. It was as if a mass collective unconsciousness effect was generated by 6 billion minds preparing to react to untold horror. That was done at Princeton. Okay? So you know more than you think you know. And you're tied in, non-locally, to a whole globe, a whole universe full of consciousness. Okay? You may think in reductionistic terms. You may think in local terms because you're programmed to believe in local terms. It's time that we reprogrammed. It's time that we started considering the possibility of limitlessness. It's time we started considering the possibility that we're part of something non-local. It's time to start considering the possibility that we're all wired within our own selves and that our wiring is hooked up to everybody else's wiring. And that the universe works as one huge mass of consciousness. Let's go to the next one. Maharishi's TM organization has carried out 500 studies to date on the effect of meditation on populations at large. He believes that meditation has a threshold effect. If 1% of a particular population meditates, he maintains crime will go down. Putting Maharishi's theory to the test, some 22 studies of 72 American cities have revealed that 1% of a population meditated with regularity, the crime rate dropped an average of 22 to 24%, with a crime trend reduction that ranked between 53 and 89% from city to city. Next slide. During the first 5 months in 1993, the TM National Demonstration Project focused on Washington, D.C. during one of its largest upturns in violent crimes ever recorded. At the surge point with 4,000 meditators, the Washington crime rate dropped 25%, even as it increased nationally by 2%. Now, the chief of police in the city of Washington laughed when they said, we can drop crime 25% over the next 5 months, because the rate was steadily increasing between 1 and 1.5% monthly. It was at its highest rate of increase. And he said, look, if you can make it snow in July 2 feet, then I'll agree with you. Those are his exact words. Well, they couldn't make it snow with their meditation. But what they did do is they dropped the crime rate 25%. The chief of police was fully on board after this stuff. Let's go to the next slide. In 1983, the TM organization turned its efforts towards supporting peace in the Middle East. The days it recorded the highest number of meditators saw fatalities in Lebanon drop by an average of 76%. Beyond the armed conflict, there was a sharp drop in local crime, traffic accidents, and fires at that time. Next slide. TM has also sought to lower what it calls the misery index, or the sum of inflation, unemployment with mass meditation. During the mass meditation experimentation period fell between 1979 and 1988. The U.S. index dropped by 40 and the Canadian index by 30%. Next slide. Israeli professor of international medicine, Leonard Leibovitch, recently conducted a healing prayer study on 4,000 sepsis patients. The infected subjects were broken down into 2 groups, a control group and a prayed for group. The group that had been prayed for experienced a shorter fever duration, far less severity of illness, required significantly less time to heal, suffered fewer deaths. Many healing prayer studies have found similar results. The difference between this and other healing prayer studies is that the patients in this study had been in the hospital between 1990 and 1996. The praying was done in the year 2000, between 4 and 10 years later. Next slide. They did not change the past from what it was. They influenced the past when it was unfolding as the present, so that it became what it was. Retrocausation and time-displaced intention remind us that consciousness operates at the quantum level beyond the domain of time and space. Thus, all future intentions create the present. There is no before and after in the mind. The brain knows of local responses like that. The brain is local. It's biological. It's stuck inside the skull. The mind is not. The mind and the brain work together, but they're distinctly different entities. There is no time and space in the human mind. So now we're starting to see non-local studies. We're starting to see studies about mind power affecting the quality of life in the world. We're starting to see studies that actually link up collective consciousness. We're starting to see studies now that actually can jump time gaps. By the way, when you look at probability factors, the randomness probability factors on these are astronomical. They're astronomical. Again, the idea of having an epistolic connection to past or future is irrelevant when it comes to consciousness. So the question is this a resource that you're making use of? Is this a resource that you're willing to make use of? Whatever you repeatedly think, believe, dream, imagine, you're programming your neural networks to establish chemically. Therefore, your thoughts produce a matching brain chemistry. The chemistry of your belief then programs your brain to continue repeating that same pattern. Your positive thoughts activate chemistry in one specific area of the brain, as we showed you, while negative thoughts activate another. And it's all continuous reinforcing initiative, positive begetting positive, negative begetting negative. Because you unceasingly think, believe, dream, and imagine, you're continuously creating and recreating the chemistry of your reality. But what kind of reality are you creating? And are you consciously choosing the reality that you're constructing? The question is, what kind of reality are you constructing? Some of us actually are consciously working at this process. You know, for years, many people would kind of consciously work at improving their health in their own life. For years, people meditated just to improve their local mind, just to make themselves relax so they didn't have to take high blood pressure medication. Now we've got people considering the prospect of changing the world, changing the world's health, changing the world's safety, changing the world's prosperity. Now we're thinking in non-local terms. We're way beyond the prospect of just this very reductionistic, localized thinking process. You can't see the spirit behind your eyes, but there's a battery in every flashlight in this room. Okay? And the battery within the flashlight is producing a light that's far greater than your present consciousness is programmed to connect with. Because you go back out the door when you leave here, and you may think about some of these things, but when you go back outside the door, there's a collective consciousness that's more of a collective unconsciousness. And that collective unconsciousness still has the TV on. And is still getting 11,000 violent crimes a year. And that's producing a field. And that field is influencing everybody who has a field that's linked up to it. And that wiring process that's going on inside your being is wired up with everything that it's surrounded by. And the reinforcement process is all negative right now. So the question is, what can you really do about changing with your mind? And my answer is, what do you want? The greatest power you have is the power of choice. And you're led to believe that the power exists externally, that the world around you and outside of you is imminently bigger than the world inside you. There's a universe within you that is no different than the universe that surrounds you. There's a matching universe. There's a parallel universe. But you're used to thinking, and I'm used to thinking, and we've been programmed to believe that everything externally dictates to us. We become, as I always say, externally reactive. So when it comes to taking charge, asserting power over disease, over negativity, over depression, over anxiety, over whatever demons you have, you're accustomed to believing that you have to go outside. Like I said earlier, you give a man a pill, he'll need 2 more pills to offset the negative side effects from the first pill. You teach a man that he is the prescription, and his wholeness will make him well. The question is, do we have the courage to separate from the programming that we presently are bound by? And the question is, tomorrow when you wake up, if you feel lousy, are you going to slip right back into the tendency to reach out? Or might you consider a new tendency to reach in? And do you dare take responsibility for the power that I'm suggesting that you have? Because you've been self-contented as well. We're weaned on self-content. That's why external reaction is so natural to us. Because we start at very young ages and we have authority that has never been taught us. This is all brand new. Maybe our great-great-grandchildren will turn that whole cycle around. Hopefully so. The point is right now isn't just right now. Right now is yesterday, right now is tomorrow, all at the same time, in the level we're talking about, because it's all a matter of whether or not we want to occupy the power of the mind, which is your only quantum reality, because your spirit lives that battery within your flashlight that nobody talks to you about beyond religion, and that nobody really has good spiritual raps about nearly enough. Just might represent something that can heal you, that can change your life, that can change the planet. But you're not used to using that. That's heavy machinery. Don't operate that heavy machinery. But it's a choice, and that's the greatest power we all have, is to make a choice, to make the difference, to make that change. And we actually have some remarkable but simple advice as to how to work that out. Let's go to the next slide. Americans spend an average of 46 minutes per day commuting to and from work, 4.2 hours per day watching television, 2.7 hours per day listening to radio, 30 minutes per day surfing the internet outside of work, and 21 minutes per day on the cell phone. That's a lot of time right there. That's a lot of time. And all the while you're doing that, those monks are meditating. But you don't have to do that. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a prescription for unlimited mind development. To take 10 minutes per day. 10 minutes. Now, let's go back to the previous slide again. We can do that. Here's what you're doing right now. Again, 4.2 hours. You take a minute or 2 out of that, maybe, or a minute or 2 out of the radio, or 30 minutes on the internet. Maybe you take 5 minutes out of that, 5 minutes out of the cell phone. Let's go to the next one again. 10 minutes per day. And repeat any positive thought mantra 250 times. A positive word, or what I call words of power. You know, there's power and there's force. There's power and there's force. When you use force on anything, you abuse it. And the only place you can use power is within yourself. Okay? So if you take 10 minutes per day and repeat any positive thought mantra 250 times, that's the magic number, 250 times. Take 10 additional minutes per day and visualize a positive thought mantra stimulating energy over your left brow. Your left brow. And why? Because that's where your left prefrontal cortex is. And all your negative memories, your dominance, if you live in this culture, you are right prefrontal dominant. Trust me. And to get out of that is going to take a little bit of cultivation, a little bit of spiritual farming. Okay? So put the reference over here. What do you do with that? Visualize it. You don't have to put a smiley face sticker here, just visualize it. Okay? That's the other thing about Americans. Americans, I think, are so profoundly direction following in the strictest sense. You know, give me the directions, let me connect point A to point. Forget it. 10 minutes a day. You're in the car. You're in traffic jam. Turn the radio off. 10 minutes, turn the radio off. What kind of change might you make in a minute? 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 days, a year, 2 years. It's not asking much. It's starting a new energetic shift. Because we've been led to believe that only monks are over here at 55,000 hours. We don't have time for that, so we're cutting out altogether. That's dysfunctional, as we all know. Over here on the other side, cutting out completely is just as crazy as trying to consider yourself going to the Himalayas for 55 years. Neither one is going to benefit you because you're not going to the Himalayas, number one. And doing nothing is getting you nothing. But there's this beautiful place in the middle called balance. A very lovely Taoist place to rest. And that place in the middle says, just take 10 minutes from your drive. Turn the radio off. Turn the television off 10 minutes early. 10 minutes before you go to bed, 10 minutes, or 5 minutes before you go to bed, 5 minutes before you get out of bed. And like anything else, you are a creature of habit. Once you've adopted this as something that's important enough to work with, and by the way, you know how easy it is to get to that point? I'll tell you this. I tell everybody this when I work with them now. I say, look, I'm going to give you my damn email address. Now, I don't like giving you my damn email address, but I'm going to give it to you. I'll tell you why. Because if you do this for 2 weeks and email me back, I've had about 500 remarkable emails. 2 weeks. Okay? So if we know that we can set this little experiment into motion, where you do 10 minutes a day of positive program, I didn't tell you to come up with some far-out mantra from the East. Don't have to do that. Do something that makes sense to you. Let's go to the next slide. Personal mantra examples. I love life. Okay? You can all say that. I love my family. God loves me. I love nature. Abundance flows through me. I am being healed by a warm, radiant light. I'm an eternal soul. I'm tapped into infinite possibility. You pick it. You can keep it as simple as you want. Whatever you resonate with. These are great examples, and a lot of these are things that I've done a lot of muscle testing with to try to see if we can't get some high numbers on these. These are all very high numbers. But again, the point I'm trying to make is unless you take the time to root this and to really actually change the energy patterns in your mind and to shift the programming from right prefrontal dominance over to left prefrontal dominance. Unless you take the time to cultivate that, you're not going to get this work done. Next. I said in addition to your personal growth exercises, at least once a week, maybe on a Sunday, direct your positive mental intentions non-locally and globally. Non-local is global visualization examples. A healing white light surrounding the world, a powerful beam of pure compassion emanating from your heart to the whole world, a small world that you can put your loving arms around, a global smiley face projected onto the world. It's not enough anymore to think locally. It's not enough. You have to think locally and you have to think non-locally. And by the way, if given the choice, I would suggest that by working non-locally, you will benefit locally. If you only work locally, it only goes one way. So both certainly work very, very nicely. And again, if you take the research says, here's what we found. The monks have taught us something. The monks have taught us that the common denominators are A, positivity, and B, repetition. That's what seems to be working here. And people literally reformat, literally reprogram. Every time you think something, tonight you're building neural nets right now. Okay? It's like you put a greenhouse and you off your kitchen, okay? And you're putting plants in there right now. But if you don't water them tomorrow and the next day, you got a bummer greenhouse with dead plants. All right? And these neural nets are starting to open up and activate and reach out. They have branches. They literally have nerve branches that start to awaken and open up. Simply by feeding positive thought, eagerness, possibility, like I said earlier. The minute you tell somebody something's possible, even if it isn't, okay? It's like the great placebo story that Deepak Chopra always tells. This is a long time ago. I had what was up WMEX radio, and I was having breakfast with him. It was a great story about how everybody at the radio station was all buzzed that Deepak was coming. And I said, oh, good. And so I looked in the back room where nobody goes, and they had this huge table of fruits and veggies all cut up and stuff. I said, oh, great. So I started wiping out all the fruits and veggies back there, and nobody else ate the fruits and veggies, you know. And they didn't know when he was coming or anything, and so I was back there munching on fruits and veggies. And suddenly there was a knock on the fire escape. And I just opened it up and thought, who the heck is knocking on the fire escape door? So he was standing there at the fire escape in a sweatshirt and sneakers. He said, well, aren't you going to invite me in? So the two of us sat there eating vegetables for about half an hour and just talking. And he told me a story about this doctor that he'd known who actually was diagnosed with an advanced cancer. And the physicians that worked with him had to sit down with him and have that really horrible talk. And he said, you know, it doesn't look good, and there's nothing we can do for you. Go home and make your peace. It looks really, really grim. So he was so depressed, overwhelmed, absolutely overwhelmed by that he was dead within 2 weeks. They looked at the records later and found out that it was an inaccurate misdiagnosis. So as Deepak said, he died from the death sentence, not from the disease. Now, again, what your mind is going to receive, both in the right and the left hemisphere, is just remarkable. It's remarkable. The receptivity to healing, the receptivity to the potential for disease, the receptivity to remarkably magical possibilities. You know, just in the span of the last 40 minutes or so, we've covered the universe worth of possibilities. We've covered individual healing, the Simonton study. We've covered global healing. We've covered healing that actually jumped time. And yet, at the same time, we're now talking about somebody who was given a death sentence inaccurately and died from the sentence. So again, neuropeptides in the areas of that doctor's brain were so dictating, so powerfully to his cells, that his cells could not reject the dictation response. That's the strength and the power of the mind plus and minus. Let's go on to the next one. Non-local mantra examples. I heal the world, I send light to all of life, I send love to all living beings, I radiate healing and compassion to all. Next. Okay, so, you know, the idea here is that you actually are one massive receptor. You know, you've got nerve endings. You know, there's one sheet that I gave you tonight in the handouts that talks about how much you neurologically record and how you can tap into that. You know, we do a lot of muscle testing. To me, muscle testing, there's so many people that get hung up on the goofy part of muscle testing. You know what I'm saying? They make it something goofy. You don't have to make it goofy. Look, every time that you get news like that physician got, do you think you're feeling real strong? I don't. When somebody comes to visit you that you love dearly, it surprises you. You've not seen them in a long time. I'm guessing you're going to have a surge of great energy.